In this episode, I want to talk with you about wasp threats to honeybee colonies. Now, there are many different types of wasps. Most of them you'll never even notice, and only a tiny fraction of all wasps show up at honeybee hives and cause damage to the colonies that those hives contain. However, those that do show up can cause significant damage to honeybee colonies. And I want to go over some just general topics related to wasp threats to your honeybee colony health, strength, and productivity. So, overall, there are multiple families of wasps, but most of the damage caused to honeybee colonies occurs from wasps that are in the family Vespidae. Now, these tend to be split into multiple groups. The group that most threatens honeybee hives are those that kind of fall generally in the paper wasp group. So there are lots of different types of wasps. Wherever you are around the world, those wasps may or may not attack your bees. I'm going to have to speak somewhat in generality here, but let me just start with wasp biology. Most of the wasps that are going to show up at your hives are social wasps. These are wasps that live in nests. And so they have the same demands that honeybee colonies have. Honeybee colonies have to go out and forage, bring food back to the hive, store that food, or feed their young, etc. Well, social wasps do the same things. So social wasps are slightly different, though, in biology and behavior than honeybee colonies. So let me walk you through the typical social wasp year so that you can understand the threat that they pose to your honeybee hive. First of all, the wasps that I am talking about generally fall in the category of hornets, yellow jackets, or some type of paper wasp. All of these are social wasps. And in social wasp colonies, at least in the temperate world, the queen wasp is the one that overwinters. So let's start then in January. In January in the northern hemisphere, or June, July in the southern hemisphere, you've got this queen wasp who is by herself somewhere hibernating in a rotten log, in some old rotten wood somewhere, a hole in the ground. She's hibernating and she is waiting for spring to start. And once spring starts, that queen wasp that was mated last year will come out of hibernation. She will find a location and she will start building her paper nest. She'll lay the first few eggs. She'll go out and forage, bring food back, feed those developing young, and when the first round of developing young emerge from that comb that she has constructed, the queen will then remain behind at the nest while the workers take over the nest construction, the nest defense, the foraging responsibility. So the queen starts off that nest in early spring, but the workers take over after that queen has a critical mass of offspring to take over those tasks that she was otherwise performing on her own. So at this point, the nest will grow and grow and grow as those workers forage, and the queen lays more eggs. There's more offspring to tend, so the workers will go collect more food to feed that offspring. That nest grows and grows through spring and summer. Usually at the end of summer or the beginning of fall, the colony transitions from raising young that are workers to raising young that are drones and queens. They start producing what we call their reproductives, those individuals that are responsible for reproduction. So in late summer, early fall, the worker population begins to shrink and you get the production of queen and drone offspring. These queens and drones will go off and mate, and once those queens are fertilized, that nest will begin to completely disappear. The workers start dying, there's no more brood being produced, and ultimately the nest dies. The drones, after they've mated with the queens, die, and now all you have is a flush of mated queens that then in late fall, early winter, will go into an area where they can hibernate until next spring. So that's the general biology of paper wasp nests, hornets, yellow jackets, paper wasp, etc. So why are they a threat to honeybee colonies? Well, there's some details that I've left out when I've been discussing this biology. They're a threat for two primary reasons. Adult wasps will eat nectar and other sugary substances to move. So you'll often see adult wasps on things like flowers collecting nectar, the same way bees collect nectar, and they're using that energy to move. But wasps have to hunt for and capture meat to bring back to their nest to feed their offspring. So their offspring are carnivores. So you get all of these worker wasps in the environment hunting things like caterpillars or grasshoppers or soft-bodied insects, stinging those individuals, chewing up those individuals, and taking that meat back to their hive to feed their young. And so this is happening through spring, through summer, and early fall. So if you think about the biology of a wasp colony, a hornet, a yellow jacket, a paper wasp, at the end of summer, their nests are as large as they're going to be all year. But at the end of summer, their prey populations, caterpillars, grasshoppers, things like that, start to go down. So you've got really strong wasp nests, you've got declining prey populations, so the wasp will pivot from foraging on things that's easy to capture and poses low risk to themselves to forage on things that are very abundant but has a greater risk to capture, i.e. the honeybee colony that lives throughout the year. And that's why when you see wasps showing up at your colonies, hunting bees, hunting brood, stealing sugar syrup, etc., it tends to be late summer, early fall, because nests are strong, they're having to pivot away from their original food reserves to the only food reserves available. So things like yellow jackets or hornets might capture bees at the nest entrance. They may go into the hive and pull out brood and take all of that stuff back with them to their nest to feed their offspring. When you do things like administer sugar syrup to colonies in late summer and early fall, you might see yellow jackets or paper wasp or hornets around here collecting that little bit of sugar syrup that you've spilled or might be leaking from your jar. So the adults could be coming to the hives to collect protein to feed to their young. The adults could be coming to their hives to collect sugar to power their own energy. And if it happens in great enough numbers, you can have a hive that's completely decimated. They can completely decimate the colony that lives in this nest. So now that you know the general biology of paper wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets, let me describe some specific things unique to each, and then I'll talk a little bit about how to control those wasps that show up at your hives. And before I go any further, it is very important that you hear me say this. I am going to use terms, common names, that are common to the wasp that we have here in the southeastern United States. You, depending on where you are watching this video, might call these things something completely different. That's why I'm trying to be very general. But yellow jackets tend to nest in the ground. The queens will go into a hole in the ground that's got a cavity in that ground. She'll start building her paper nest, and she'll go through that biology cycle throughout the year that I've told you about. Their nests tend to get really large in the ground, and even the strongest of yellow jacket nests here in Florida, as an example, can come out of the ground and have a paper nest that goes up the side of a tree. I've seen pictures of them in vehicle cavities before. They can nest lots of places, but generally speaking, yellow jackets nest in the ground. For us here in Florida, they are the wasp that causes the most significant damage in late summer, and they will go into your hives, they will collect brood, they will collect adult bees, you'll see them around the feeder. Hornets tend to be paper wasps that nest in trees. They will build those spherical paper nests that tend to have an entrance at the bottom of that nest. Here in the southeastern U.S., we have a hornet called the bald-faced hornet. It's a black hornet with a white patch on its face. They make those spherical nests that hang in trees, and they have the same biology otherwise as the yellow jacket. They go out, collect prey, they collect sugar, etc. Then you get the traditional paper wasps that everyone has nesting under the eaves of their houses. Those are usually small nests. The wasp may be red or brown or black with yellow or orange markings. Those wasps tend not to go into hives to collect bees or brood. They tend to be more so attracted to sugar. So the yellow jackets and the hornets tend to be the worst wasp that honeybee colonies encounter because those hornets and yellow jackets, those wasps make such large nests, they have a large demand for protein and sugar, and the honeybee colony represents a great source for that. So what do you do if you have these things coming to your nest? Well, first things first, think about the simple stuff that I told you about. If yellow jackets and hornets are attracted to sugar syrup, then make sure you are careful when you are feeding your bees. For example, Oftentimes people will fill their feeders back at the honey house and they'll slosh them around. And by the time they get to your hive, they're covered in sugar water. You might turn your feeder over like this and drip sugar water all the way to this hole. And by the time you've put it back in the hive, there's sugar water everywhere. Just try to be very hygienic when you are administering sugar water to hive. Don't spill it. Don't have sticky stuff anywhere. Another good way to reduce the impact of yellow jackets, hornets, and other wasps at your hive is to reduce the entrance. Give the bees a smaller space to have to defend against these predatory wasps. So here's a standard entrance reducer with a large entrance or a much smaller restricted entrance. You can restrict the entrance of your hive to 1 bees or 2 bees so that they can defend that hole better from the yellow jackets or the hornets or the wasps that are trying to get into the nest. Another thing that you can do to try to stop the invasion of wasps into your apiaries to collect your bees or your sugar water is you can purchase and use traps. Wherever you are around the world, there's no doubt hornet traps or wasp traps that are available for you to hang in your apiary. The traps will have some directions on them, some bait suggestions. You just want to make sure if you're putting those out that bees themselves aren't getting into those traps or you're not trapping something that you don't want in those traps. But you can put those traps around the apiary if you have a lot of pressure at your hives. In my experience, traps don't typically work so well because by the time hornets or wasps or yellow jackets are coming to your nest, they've found what they want and that's where they're going to go. Really, an incredibly good defense against all of the wasp threats to your hives are strong colonies. Simply having a lot of bees that can thwart the yellow jacket or wasp or hornet interest in the hives can keep those wasps at bay. One of the last things that you may have to do if the threat and the pressure is so high on your colony that your colony is at risk of dying, you might actually have to move your hive during peak pressure season. There are times in our research apiaries that yellow jackets have been so bad apiary wide that we had to relocate the entire apiary just away from the pressure. Really, the best piece of advice that I can give you is the most difficult piece of advice, which is the best thing you can do is find the nest that's causing the threat and destroy it. But that's so much easier said than done. Finding that yellow jacket nest, finding that hornet nest out there in the environment that's causing all this pressure on your hive can be very difficult. And then if you do find it, I wouldn't recommend you trying to take that nest out. I would recommend you reaching out to a pest control operator who has experience. So removing that threat is another great way to reduce the pressure of these yellow jackets and hornets and wasps of all types on your nest. I've been at the University of Florida for a very long time, and in all of my years of being here, we've only had to respond to significant yellow jacket threats twice. So the reason I'm telling you that is I tend to see it being cyclical. Wasps are often at hives, often in apiaries, but they're often causing no problems at all. It might be a few bees here, it might be a few bees there, a little bit of sugar water over there. That's generally not a problem. We tend to have to take steps to control them when we see significant assaults. Wasp going in and out of our nest, wasp overrunning the bees. And fortunately, that doesn't happen so frequently. But hopefully, if you spot wasps in your apiary, I've given you some tricks and advice that you can use to keep those threats at bay and to maximize the strength and health and productivity of your honeybee colonies.